What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today we have 5 more mechanics to steal from other games for your D&D game. The last video I did, you all seemed to really enjoy. A lot of comments on it sharing some of your favorite mechanics to steal, and some comments asking that I do something similar in the future. So we're doing it. We're doing 5 more mechanics that I really like. Some of them are from games that we've talked about before. Some are from brand new games that we didn't talk about in the last video. But I wanted to get into some more mechanics that I think are a lot of fun and can really enhance D&D games. To be clear, because I didn't make this clear in the last video, I don't think you should take all of these and put them in one game, because at that point, you're essentially not playing D&D anymore. If you want to try it, go for it. But I want to share these because there might be something that fits your game and the tone that you're going for. And so that's what I want to convey in these videos, are tools that you can use to tell the type of stories that you want to tell and fill in gaps that D&D might not be able to fill. So let's get into the first one. Number 1, they're getting the hat trick. They had 2 in the last video and they got 1 in this one. 13th Age has a mechanic called One Unique Thing. And this isn't even really a mechanic. It's just a step in the character creation process that I love. When you're making your character, you pick the one unique thing about them in the world. Your character is the only person that this statement applies to. And that's all the game gives you. There's no list. There's no table. It's just come up with something. And obviously work with your DM to come up with something that's going to work for both of you, because obviously the DM doesn't want something that's going to break their world. And the other important thing is it cannot have an effect mechanically. So if I'm making a character and I want to say they're a dragon. Okay. Well, you can't be a dragon in combat. So what do you mean that you're a dragon? I am a reincarnated dragon. I was a dragon and I was killed 1,000 years ago. And however many years old my character is, that many years ago, I woke up in the body of a baby. And now I'm trying to reclaim my former glory, find my horde, whatever. I looked at online. There are some great examples you can find online. If you search 13th Age One Unique Thing, there are lists that have been compiled from people's games about great ones of like a monk that started off by meditating for a whole hour, and then a whole day, and then a whole week, and then a whole month, and so on and so forth until a whole millennia. And they woke up from their meditation and their temple was ruined. Their body had like been covered in essentially stone, just all the sediment over time. So they had to break out of it. And they're a monk who meditated for 1,000 years nonstop. And you just go from there. That's the unique thing about them. And what I like about this is it puts a lot of the story building impetus on the players and allows them to really have a strong influence. Even in an established setting, you can find something that fits within the world that can make your character unique. There's actually a resource for fans of Eberron that Keith Baker made called Eberron Confidential that's very similar to this. It is a list of hidden roles that are your character's secret. And so it's very similar in that way. Our actual play here on the channel, Kyber Shards, uses Eberron Confidential. So I really like One Unique Thing because it gives a lot of freedom to the players to play with it. And it can really drive storylines in your campaign. It can give you really cool hooks as a DM to build side quests around your players' stories and how their one unique thing plays into the campaign. Next up is Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Ability Skill Initiative. So obviously in D&D 5th Edition, your initiative is based on your dexterity score. You can take feat to bump it up. Homebrew some stuff, but I love Pathfinder 2nd Edition's idea of initiative in that they allow the players to influence the role that they are going to make. They don't get to decide. The DM is still the arbiter of that, but their pre-combat, pre-encounter actions can influence when they get to go, or at least what skill they get to roll. So the idea being that in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the default is perception. If you want to keep it default, just the dexterity modifier, that's fine. You want to do something that's going to have a potential proficiency bonus included. But if you just want to keep a dexterity modifier as a base, that's fine. But then if your players are doing cool stuff in the lead up to the encounter, you can reward that by saying, okay, you're trying to sneak around up behind them. You can take stealth as your initiative roll. You're trying to kick down the door and like you think that there are enemies on the other side and you're just trying to kick it in and surprise them. Athletics. And you can really give them the driving force to start encounters, because oftentimes what happens is you will have a wizard or a fighter or somebody that's not a high dexterity character actually start the encounter, like perform the action that pops things off, but then they end up going last in the initiative order because they have a bad initiative score. And the reason I like this is because it can also alleviate a lot of times when players declare that they're taking an action before you called for initiative. There can be the impulse to go ahead and let them have that free attack before initiative starts. Well, they said they shot, so yeah, go ahead and roll an attack roll. With this, okay, go ahead and make your attack roll, like your attack modifier, as your initiative roll. So you're going to potentially go really high in the initiative order, and then when we get to your turn, you can then take your action. But for the NPC side of things, I would, generally speaking, and obviously this depends on who kind of has the drop, whoever the active force is in engaging the encounter, if it's the PCs, then have them roll active rolls like stealth, athletics, acrobatics, things like that. And for the ones that are being set upon, have them roll the more reactive skills like perception or survival or whatever you want to go with, insight, to see if they can see through what's going on and respond in kind before the initial actions are done. So I like this in concept. I really like the idea. I've never been a huge fan of initiative in D&D 5th edition just being a base dexterity roll, and then whatever you roll, that's where you go. In the previous video, I talked about another initiative, or a couple other initiative systems. So clearly initiative is something that I really would like to see revamped. But I do really like getting to involve the player character's skills in their initiative rolls. Okay. Devil's Bargain from Blades in the Dark. So the Devil's Bargain is when a player is making a roll, there's a step in the process called the Devil's Bargain, where the GM can offer an additional die to the player in exchange for something. Collateral damage, money, the betrayal of a loved one, or the perception that the player character is betraying a known ally. Something like that. And so taking that to D&D, obviously advantage. Like giving them advantage is an easy way to entice them, because then they're going to want it. It allows them to really buy into roles that they want to succeed, but they know upfront the cost. It's not like in Genesis or the Star Wars role-playing game where you have a character that is making a perception check just to see if they notice anything interesting. And oh no, you've rolled 5 threat, and now all of a sudden something catastrophic has happened. It's like, I just wanted to see if there was anything interesting in the shop. Wouldn't have done it if I knew that Cthulhu was going to erupt out of the floor. With the Devil's Bargain mechanic, the player is bought in. They know what the potential cost is, and they can reject it. That is absolutely a part of it. It's not like the player engages the Devil's Bargain and they're stuck in with whatever you come up with. They get to say no if they think the cost is too high. And this can just be a hand wave thing for most checks of like, yeah, I want to make a perception check to see if I notice anything interesting. Okay, Devil's Bargain. No, I'm good. That's adds what, a half second to an interaction on a roll. But if they say yes, like, I know this enemy has to be low on hit points. We've dealt like 150 points of damage. I want to hit them so hard. Okay. Devil's Bargain. What's it going to cost me? So you have this flaming axe that you've been using for a while now, and you want to swing it with reckless abandon. So let's say you're fighting in the marketplace. So you're going to set a stall on fire and it's going to start causing collateral damage unless you all shift your focus away from the fighting to stop the flames. let's do it. Or no. Important thing with Devil's Bargain, though, it's not only if you succeed. If I say yes, and then I roll 2 natural ones on my attack rolls with advantage, the marketplace is still getting set on fire. I took the bargain just because it didn't work out. You could also modify it to potentially impose disadvantage on an enemy's check. That's also a possibility if you want to get really crazy with it. The only thing I wouldn't do, honestly, is invert it. Like if the enemy is making a check and saying Devil's Bargain and allowing the players to implement a negative thing on your NPCs in exchange for them having an advantage on the roll, that can get a bit too wonky and Calvin Ball-y with just all the different crazy things that your players could throw at you. So I keep this purely to the player characters are special and they get access to this mechanic and no one else does. Okay, this next one is, bear with me, because it's a little out there and different from the other ones I've talked about. It's Fronts by Dungeon World. So Fronts are really more of a Dungeon Master organizational tool than an at-the-table mechanic, but I love it so much. I probably am going to do a deep dive video on this mechanic alone because I think it is so valuable, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice in the short little blurb for the sake of this list. So probably stay tuned. We'll have a longer video about Fronts coming out. But Fronts by Dungeon World is essentially you take time between sessions as a Dungeon Master to kind of determine what fronts you want the party to be fighting on. That's where the term or the title Fronts comes from, is fighting on 2 different fronts. And that's kind of, in a lot of campaigns, what you want to do is you want to build all these different fronts that the player characters have to fight on, and they have to choose where their time and resources are going. But a lot of times as a Dungeon Master, we build all these really awesome campaign threads and different things going on and different plates spinning. And the party will really hyper-focus in on one thing. And they'll go until something draws their attention over here. And then they'll pivot and go. But it's almost as if that storyline froze in time while we waited on the party to come check it out. So what Fronts does is it allows you to determine what are campaign level fronts, like these things that are going to be going through your whole campaign, and what are adventure level fronts, things that are going to be happening in the next couple sessions. And then it encourages you to identify the cast of characters that are going to be major players in this front from an antagonistic standpoint. But the thing that I really love about Fronts is the Grim Portents. And these are essentially what happens if the players don't do anything. What happens with this story if the party is gone? So you write out a bulleted like checklist of, okay, step 1, this thing happens. Step 2, the next thing happens. So if it's the front is the impending horde overriding the hometown of the PCs, let's say. So you identify who like the person assembling the horde is. That's like your main baddie for this storyline. But, you know, you start off with the goblin tribes are united under one banner. The gnolls are hired as mercenaries to come assist with the horde. The goblins and gnolls move into the forest next to the city. The orcs are liberated from the mines where they're enslaved. So, you know, all these different things that are happening without the players interacting with the story. Now, at any point, if the players hear word in town, like, hey, we hear that, like, you know, the goblins normally are tribal and like fight against each other in the woods outside of town. But we've been hearing that they've been like banding together and like sacking the little villages that live on the edge of the forest. I wonder what's up with that. And if the party goes investigates that and stops the unification of the goblins, then that's been prevented. The whole front isn't prevented. You know, they're still going to hire the gnolls and try to free the orcs. But it can also, what's interesting, because the United Goblins can be something that happens off screen. The PC's over here, this happens. Or you can present it in a, you know, goblins have been attacking the villages. So the PCs go and they decide to deal with it diplomatically. It's like, okay, what's going on, goblins? Why are you attacking the villages? Like, well, we want gold. We want food. We need resources. And you present the party in the midst of the unification. And so it's like, well, if all of you could work together, then, you could gather lumber, build crops, things like that as a unified front, as opposed to these little groups that go attack innocent people. It's like, oh, that's a good idea. And so the party goes to the different tribes and brings them together and helps them come to an understanding where they can unify. And you just, on your checklist, goblins have been unified. So the party's actions have actually assisted in the grim portents. And that can be an interesting thing where when the horde arrives, the party's like, oh, we have assisted in this. Whoops. Like the liberating the orcs out of slavery. That is absolutely a storyline that the party could take part in, feel really good about it, until the orcs that they liberated dip out and go join the big horde. So that's not to like punish the party, but if you've plotted all these things out and you present the story, because that's the thing, is that by planning all this stuff out, you know what's going on at every step of the way. And so you can present the story in a way to where you can allude to the fact that the orcs they don't have any desire to go integrate into the nearby town. That's something that you can just say, this particular group of orcs that have been enslaved, they're not going to go live with their slavers. They're not interested in that. But then also, while the grim portents are being fulfilled, you could have the party interacting with them in interesting ways. The goblins could remember the party later on down the road, that they were the ones who came and helped them. The other aspect of fronts I really like is it also codifies the stakes and what you're allowing yourself to leave up to chance. So basically, while you're planning out your fronts, you also write down what the stakes are, as in the form of a question. Will the horde be able to recruit, let's say the party has an NPC ally that's a really high level bugbear, really powerful bugbear, war vet, go way back with the party. But the person that is organizing the horde would really love to have this bugbear war vet as a lieutenant in the horde. So you just write down, can the horde recruit Blagnar? Sure. And so you can then have a scene during a session where somebody that's a member of the horde comes while the party is meeting with Blagnar and tries to recruit him, and then the party can interact with that scene and try to convince Blagnar to know, like, you don't want to be a part of this. They're wanting to hurt people, but Blagnar can have his reasons for wanting to potentially join the horde, but also his reasons to stay loyal to the party, and you leave it up to the players and the dice to ultimately decide that. I think this is all really cool. I've been rambling about it for a while. Yeah, we definitely need a full video on this, but I really like fronts. Go read more about it. Dungeon World has an SRD with all of the like rules and thoughts on fronts on the interwebs. Go seek it out. If I remember, I'll put a link down there. And yeah, just go check it out. It's really cool. And lastly, this one's probably the biggest curveball I've done in either of these videos. So there is a RPG called the Good Society RPG that's based on the world of the writings of Jane Austen. Now, hold on. There's some really interesting mechanics in this role-playing game for social encounters, because obviously in Good Society RPG, you're not wielding an axe and fighting the undead hordes. It's all social interaction. That's the whole point of the game. So you can pull some really interesting mechanics from Good Society RPG into D&D for social interaction. Some people hate the idea of adding mechanics to roleplay, and that's fine. That's totally fine. If you don't like that, then a lot of these aren't going to be applicable. But some people like a bit of structure. Some people like a bit of mechanics sprinkled in just to add some interesting things. And I picked one that is not going to impede your ability to just roleplay willy-nilly. You can still roleplay like you currently do in D&D. But Good Society RPG has a mechanic called Inner Monologue. So how I would pull this into D&D 5th edition is you could put it as like an additional use for inspiration. If you have a point of inspiration, you can cash it in to force an inner monologue on another character. So the idea being that you get insight, and obviously your character isn't going to know this, but you as a player will. This is a storytelling mechanic that I love for a lot of reasons. One, it can allow the DM or the players to provide insight for the story that we're telling. At the end of the day, my philosophy when it comes to D&D, it is collaborative storytelling. And things that exist in the meta are part of that story, like an inner monologue. Things that the characters in the story don't know can still enrich the story being told. I don't know why I'm doing bird hands, but so you have an interaction with an NPC and they're being really standoffish. Maybe it's an old ally of the party, and out of nowhere, they're just being kind of a jerk. And one of your players has inspiration. Like, I want to cash in a point of inspiration to hear this person's monologue, inner monologue. And so use the DM can be like, okay, and just take a minute to explain where they are internally, why they're acting standoffish towards the players, what the players potentially did, player characters potentially did to upset them. And that can also, it's just really interesting and cool. And another reason I love it is because I'm all about being inclusive at my table with different play styles. I'm a theater nerd. And so I enjoy acting through my character. And I like to think that there are times where I can inject some nuance into the way my character's acting versus the way they actually feel. That's not how everyone role plays. A lot of people role play by describing what their character is doing and saying. And it's harder to convey nuance and a conflicted nature in that type of role play. Inner monologue allows you, if you are describing the way your character is acting and another player or the DM says, hey, inner monologue, then they get to show the nuance of their player character and the conflict that they're going through and how they're being maybe hypocritical in their actions, but the reasons why, and how they know they're being hypocritical, but they can't help themselves. For the DM to cash in inner monologue, you could do it one of two ways. You could either extend the inspiration mechanic to the players, and so when they really like something that you did as a DM, or you really nailed something from a role-playing standpoint, they can give you a point of inspiration. Or as the DM, you could just have unlimited, and just when there's an interesting moment happening from a role-playing standpoint, you could just say, inner monologue, go. So this is definitely something for people that enjoy the storytelling aspect of D&D. If this is a tactical combat game for you, do not do this. Do not try to get your players to do this because they're not going to enjoy it. But if you like collaborative storytelling at the table and role play and character nuance and interactions, I love the idea of the inner monologue mechanic. I love it so much. I need to put it in a game that I'm running. Don't know which one though. I hope you all enjoyed this video of 5 more mechanics to steal for your D&D game. Be sure to like the video down below if you liked it, or dislike it if you didn't like it. Comment down below and let me know what are some mechanics from non-D&D games that you have stolen for your D&D game, or if you play a game other than D&D, have you stolen anything from D&D and brought it into another game? That would also be interesting to hear. But thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time.